Good morning, everyone. It's a Wednesday morning and it's beautiful weather here. And I hope that, we find you and your family doing well. Allow me to introduce myself. This is Joanne Lee, Dean of FIU Business. FIU Business is made of London Undergraduate School of Business and the Chapman Graduate School of Business, and currently we're the largest business school in the state of Florida. And today I have the privilege to introduce you our first speaker series with FIU Business and FIU's CasaCuba. Now, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, we have launched several virtual programs featuring industry and faculty experts in an effort to serve as a resource to our community. And CasaCuba at FIU is bringing together scholars, policymakers, business leaders, students, and the community at large to realize a multidimensional Cuban cultural center and think tank that we think will facilitate the discussion and study of Cuban affairs and the celebration of Cuban heritage. At FIU Business, we wanted to be part of this, telling the story of how Cuban influence has shaped business in South Florida and far beyond. We're especially proud of our featured speakers today, Eduardo and Manny, and both of whom are FIU Business alumni and very, very outstanding leaders in global business. And I have the distinctive pleasure to really get to know them well and can confidently say that they are really a fine product of FIU Business. So thank you again for joining us today. And I will now turn to our amazing moderator, Natalia, who kick off today's event. Natalia?
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be kicking off this inaugural conversation, hopefully the first of many really interesting gatherings that we have as we navigate through, settle from the last few months and navigate through the upcoming few months. So thank you again, Eduardo and Manny, for joining us. So I'll kick us off so we can set the stage for our participants. Whoever wants to start, tell us a little bit more about yourselves. I'll kind of say a couple words about me so people know who it is that's moderating the discussion. But Manny, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about you, kind of your trajectory and your current work in business.
Sure. Manny, Manuel Perez de la Mesa, referred to as Manny, graduated from FIU in August of '77, began working at that time for a subsidiary of RJ Reynolds Industries, which became RGR Nabisco. Started in the finance track. A few years later, migrated over to operations and manufacturing, and then over to sales and marketing, and then ultimately to general management. But really, the core is that for 20 years, I ran a several billion-dollar public company, Pool Corporation. Ticker symbol is Pool, P-O-O-L, which operates throughout the U.S., Europe, Canada, Australia. And that's the key in terms of that business, and very fortunate to be part of a very successful enterprise for many years.
Thank you. Eduardo?
Yes, so I don't normally start with when I graduated from FIU because I always say it took me 7 years to get my bachelor's, and that was because I was working, and but my background is basically from the maritime industry. I started in shipping and moved up quickly from operations to sales and management, running a division by age 21, different times than today. And then I went into business for myself, which many of my friends thought had lost my mind because it was a good company and we were all moving up as a group. But since then, I've run a shipping line, managed ships, owned ships, run a cargo airline, run a logistics company, and through that got into technology. And that's where we ended up. We moved from a Lotus Notes shops, a maritime software company, to where we are today with PayCargo, which basically PayCargo is a settlement system in the freight and logistics world. So that's a little bit about my background. Like Manny, been doing this for a long time and love it. You have to have a passion for it, and I do.
Thank you. Well, welcome again to all of our participants. My name is Natalia Martinez-Kalinina. I am an organizational psychologist by training. And for the last 5 years, I've run the expansion of a company called the Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC for short, from Boston to Miami, where we are building an innovation district. So we work very heavily with entrepreneurs, researchers, and a variety of public and private stakeholders across the city. So really excited to have this conversation. A quick note for participants is that we will be taking questions through the Q&A feature on the bottom kind of tier of your Zoom. So if you come up with things along the way, if you've already come up with questions that you want to flag for us, feel free to do so. We'll talk for about 40 more minutes or so, and then we'll open up to asking some of the questions from the audience. So start thinking about those as we chug along. A small kind of, before we jump into the meatier topics, obviously we're here hosted by FIU Business and by CasaCuba. And so I'd love to just briefly touch on what the Cuba angle is here for everybody. So kind of what's your Cuba related story or your Cuba relation, whoever wants to start.
I always start that I'm a Peter Panner. I came from Cuba at age 7 without my parents. I did come with an older brother, and what can I say? You know, like many of us Peter Panners, we ended up, you know, you're hit with a challenge at a very young age, and either become very successful or you go the other way. The good thing is that most of us have gone the right way. So very committed to a free Cuba one day. It's not there. I think we've passed that on to hopefully the next generation.
I came in 1961. I was 4 years old, with nothing, as most that came from Cuba to the U.S. or elsewhere. And to Eduardo's point, I mean, we were all hit with a challenge. At that point, basically, in my case, my parents. You start and you take advantage of the opportunities that are provided to you. And I think that it speaks volumes about the success of Cubans that came as children to the U.S., how many have succeeded in many frontiers, whether it's business, in the arts, in public service. And I think that speaks volumes about that whole generation that understood the sacrifices being made, but also understood the opportunities that were available and fully took advantage of those.
All right, well, thank you both for sharing. I came to the US when I was 11. I'm half Cuban and half Russian. So I was born in Cuba, but I lived in Mexico for most of my childhood. So also a bit of a random composite of stories here. So, all right, so jumping into the meat of our just new normal and resiliency conversation. You're both from very different industries, but industries with a kind of a global reach. So walk us a little bit through how you've seen your industry and your sector be affected over the past few months, and kind of how your business specifically has adapted, what you've changed, what you're witnessing, kind of just trends that you're noticing.
Okay. Well, I will talk first about pool because that's not my main course, but since my retirement from management at the end of 2018, I'm also involved with 5 other businesses on their boards as an investor as well. And in terms of pool as a public company, reported very strong first quarter earnings. Sales were going very, very well through mid-March. And then the back half of March had some headwinds, but still reported 13% growth in sales for the first quarter. And then POOLCORP also communicated when they released earnings in the third week of April that, again, there was a modest downturn in the month of April, but the expectations were that by the course of the year, sales would be relatively speaking flat year on year. That was what was reported in the third week of April. The other companies that I'm involved with have a range of activities. In some cases, one is a packager of consumer staples, and in that particular case, that business has done well and continues to do well with positive year-on-year sales comps. That's in one extreme. And the other extreme is industrial and automotive products wholesaler. And in that particular case, particularly on the automobile side, there's been a headwind given a lot less driving activity, and therefore the need for maintenance and repair activity is reduced. So in that particular case, we had to right-size the organization for the volume of activity that was taking place. And that was done in a form of both a reduction in force as well as furlough. But it also served, frankly, as an opportunity. In that particular case, that's the company that I was part of an acquisition that took place in October of last year. And we brought on a new CEO effective January 2nd. So it enabled the new CEO to really have a fresh look at the business and in essence, kind of refine what was being done. It was a business that was being undermanaged historically. So when it's all said and done, I think, and it's already evidence even still in May, that the actions taken are net positive in terms of not only the right sizing of cost standpoint, but it's really the sales are recovering faster than we in fact anticipated.
Unfortunately, the industry that we're in is tied to travel, and that is we operate a portal, which is a payment portal for the freight and logistics industry. Our major customers are, the DHL, FedExes of the world, and they pay American Airlines, Delta, and so many others, as well as the ship lines. What we've seen is obviously you had a very difficult February because China, for the most part, shut down a lot of the exports. And, not that it impacted as much our business, because if we've seen where we're at is we've been pretty stable. The major payers, our largest customers, their volumes are down. New people are being added, new companies as we speak. And that's because you're operating from home. Who wants to write a check? Who can write a check? It's better to go online and do an online payment, similar as you would do through your bank for your, your rent, your mortgage, or whatever, your electric bill. So in that sense, our business is stable. Unfortunately, our business partners, if you look at the airlines, American lost what, $2 billion? I think United or Delta about $1.9 billion in the first quarter. And understanding that January, February, really there was very little impact on their business except for China. So cargo, for the most part, on the air side of life, moves in the belly of an airplane, 80% of it. That world has changed. And as we look at it, cargo continues to move. In fact, cargo volumes probably will be stable, if not going up on the air side. The rates for those have gone up. Never to be able to compensate for not having passengers on the plane. Now, airlines, like every other industry, have become creative. You don't see it yet in the US, but you see it in the rest of the world. They're putting cargo into the passenger seats and flying planes with strictly cargo because cargo is continuing to move. That said, that industry is in deep, has some deep challenges. I think the best scenario is before the end of the year, maybe they're back to 40% of the flights that they had at December of last year. And that 40% may be 23, because when you start not using the middle seats, so it's a challenged industry. I mean, we're not on the passenger side, but the passenger affects the cargo. So the cargo rates will continue to go up. I can tell you that as much as you see and you hear about, business moving away from, buying or manufacturing and trade, we've gone through difficult situations in the past. Trade continues to grow. Maybe it'll not grow at the pace that was anticipated. And I can say that because IATA was anticipating that air freight would double, I think, between 2014 and 2024, if I remember the dates. Most logically, that's probably not going to happen. On the maritime side, everyone was anticipating larger and ships taking 24,000 containers. Will they still be there? Yes. Are they going to use all 24,000? Absolutely not. So it's a challenging industry, and it's a challenge because, again, the major issue in this industry is that you have an opportunity to work not just with the logistics companies, but you also work with the manufacturers, the Samsungs of the world, and many others like that. And they're also being challenged. So I think that as we look at the balance of the year and until there's a vaccine, it's going to be challenging. So I wish I could add more to that from our industry, but you know, all the indications are we're going to have a difficult summer, which is normally the beginning of the best period, and it should pick up by the fourth quarter. So, and I guess a lot of that is going to depend on how quickly the U.S. opens up and how quickly consumers come back. So that's it.
So you both mentioned a couple of really interesting things looking in the middle term. I think it's really difficult to look at the long term given kind of the number of unknowns at the moment. But obviously, you know, there are larger public health questions still afoot. There are a lot of uncertainties around consumer behavior. Aside from the things that both of you have already mentioned, or if you want to comment on anything further or that the other one has said, kind of what are your biggest open questions and or unknowns when you look ahead at the next, let's say, 12 months?
As Eduardo mentioned, it's a matter of how the U.S. consumer responds, reacts. You know, before the call, we're talking about the fact that where the quarantine regulations have been relaxed, the consumer has come back, frankly, faster than I anticipated, at least in terms of going out to restaurants and going to shopping centers. Don't believe that the air travel component has come back anywhere near, and that probably takes a little longer. But I think it really is going to vary from industry to industry. Again, some industries very resilient, no real significant issue. But if you look at the airline industry, the hotel industry, conventions, there are sectors that it's going to take longer, logically longer for them to come back. Mm-hmm. And in those sectors, there are some that will adapt better than others. And you've already seen that in the restaurant sector. You see some progressive restaurants that perhaps had some takeout service before, but they've really promoted that in the past 2 months. And while they are not doing the total volume that they were doing perhaps prior to mid-March, they're doing perhaps 70, 80%. So with any kind of modest reopening, their total sales could be pretty close back to normal. Others have basically waited for something to happen. And I think that goes back to the sheer nature of those that adapt and pivot and address the opportunities available are going to ultimately succeed. And those that don't. And I think it goes back to, Natalia, your original question. You know, if you look at the 2 million Cubans that left Cuba in different waves over the course of time, if they had just come and just waited for something to happen, they would still be waiting. On the other hand, if they came and they were ready to work, they were ready to address opportunities that were made available to them and were able to pivot at different instances over the course of their lives, and they ultimately succeeded. And I think that's a major lesson to be learned across the board. And it's something that for those of us that have gone through various challenges from a macroeconomic standpoint or challenges like 9/11 that challenged the core of the U.S., we understood that, hey, there's going to be another day, and there's a path out, and let's take advantage, see what we can do better, see what we can do different to be ultimately successful.
I think absolutely, Manny, you're 100% correct. I think it's if we look at it, and I think 2 words: transition, as how do we get to the point that we have probably a vaccine, because I think everything here is going to be split to the time that you don't have a vaccine and when to have a vaccine. and think about it. Who's concerned if you get on an airplane with someone with polio? We all have a polio vaccine. So it becomes a non-issue. I think if there was another solution, an interim one, where there's a pill treatment that you can take, and in 2 days, you never see the hospital, you never get sick, and you can get past it. Obviously, that would also be next step. But it's how do we transition into that period? And frankly, any kind of a business that depends on a group of over 10, 15 people getting together in a location, be it a sporting event, be it a play on Broadway, be it anything of that nature, that's going to have to wait. It appears that that's not going to be easy. Even if you wear a mask, I don't know how they're going to solve that. Mm-hmm. So I think those businesses, as flexible, which is my other thing, you have to be flexible. And that's what Manny said. We were flexible when we came from Cuba, flexible in many ways. I mean, we saw it with our parents who took jobs. Many of them were doctors, attorneys, and they worked in any job they could find. So we're not there as a result of this situation. I think that where we are is you have to be flexible as to what opportunity gets presented to you, especially over the next maybe year, if that, because it looks like this vaccine, from everything, and I don't have any other insight than what I see or read in news articles, but I think that's the transition that we have to go through. And you don't lose face. There is, at the end of it, and it says we're going to get past this. We've gotten past worse situations than this, and it takes a little bit of patience, and that's not something I'm good at. So I can't preach it because I'm horrible at it. So, but that's what it's going to have to take: a little bit of patience and a lot of persistence, and keep at it. You may not find you may find the right company, but the wrong job. Take the company, and you'll get there. Because frankly, I can tell you that you get recognized, even if you're doing things that don't seem to be the right position for you. Top management does see you, and they see the work you do, and trust me, it's you'll rise to the top. So I guess those are the only thing we can do during these times is give a little words of encouragement, because we will get past this. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and I always say it's not a train coming at you at 100 miles an hour. It's sunshine. So keep at it.
I can't remember who the quote is by, but there's a quote that I often think about that relates to patience. It's also not a strength of mine, that says patience, it's like a noun, a mild form of despair disguised as virtue, which I think is sometimes feels very accurate. So kind of switching gears a little bit, both of you have multiple kind of formal and informal leadership roles, kind of across several intersections. So what has been most challenging for you as a leader during this time? Has anything surprised you, and what has inspired you?
Fortunately, I'm dealing with senior managers that have been around the block a few times, and therefore understand what needs to be done. And really, it's much of what we've been talking about. It's looking at what's ahead, the other side, and how do we traverse this process in the best way possible to be stronger and better in 21 and 22 and 23. So that's the core of it. My role is being at this juncture a sounding board for them, and really making sure that we don't overweight the short term. And some cases, some companies have to do that for survival's sake. In the case of the 6 companies I'm involved with, we don't, and therefore we can take a more of a medium to longer term perspective in terms of what we do. For example, continuing to invest in adding talent in selected areas, whether it be management trainees. That continues on at Pool. That's one area that, in fact, back in the 08, 09 recession, we increased the number of recruits that we did into the management training program. In another case, in fact, this past Monday, a new CFO came on to another company. We're recruiting for a CIO in another business. So we're continuing to make investments, understanding that there is a tough area here, and we'll traverse this and be stronger at the other side. So I think that's core, and don't get caught up with the media. That's a major statement. I try to avoid watching the news on TV. It's by and large not worth it. Figure out what's going to happen and act on it, and don't get caught up with the media. Don't get caught up in the short term.
Yeah, so from my side, the PayCargo, well, I'm involved in a port in Manaus that we have, which is the middle of the Amazon. I'm involved in a finance company. The bulk of our business is of my time, and the major business is PayCargo. And frankly, the first thing we wanted to do is go out. We have a small team. I think it's about 60, less than 65. So the first thing was to go out to them and say, look, regardless what's happened and what's going to happen, you're not going to lose your job in 2020. I mean, even if the world comes to an end. So sit tight, relax, let's move forward. Let's get this thing behind us, and understand it's a lot easier to say that today than it was back in February, when we saw volumes dropping and things going negative. So, but that was the main thing. So you're trying to bring you have to bring confidence. And then the other thing is to change the way you do the business so that you are in daily communications with the team. And I think one of the most important things, and it's important not only in a business, it's important in a personal relationship and everything else, is you really have to have a sense of humor. So somewhere along the line, you have to, keep putting things in there that to the team, not only from a motivation standpoint, but also from a sense of humor standpoint. The guys, look, we messed this up pretty badly. Let's see what we can do to fix it. And it is a team effort. We're all in it together. As a global CEO, I have the responsibility for not just the U.S., but in Europe. And Europe took a significant beating compared to where the U.S., as far as business and everything else is concerned. To a certain extent, I think that it's that aspect of it to keep the team motivated and keep things moving and on a positive fashion, because also the industry has suffered. And what else can we do to help the industry we're in? And we've done that to the extent of, I'm going to say, our business model is we advance funds for the payers. Our risks have gone up. There's no question about that. And that's, there's a cost to that risk. But the fact is that, it's all very manageable, and you can do it and try to have some fun along the way. I've always said that to everyone who's going to start in any kind of a career. Make sure you find something you love and you enjoy doing it, and you can be doing it for 24/7, because basically that's what's going to make you happy. If you're not happy with what you're doing and you don't enjoy what you're doing, and if you don't make it fun, you should be doing something else. So this is one of those times which is much more challenging, but we've got to do it. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. So I think one of the things that came up, and that I know we chatted when we first kind of were preparing for this call, I think the moment we're living in has pieces that feel very anxiety ridden, pieces that feel, it's easy to become cynical or pessimistic when there's so much uncertainty for folks. And so I'm hearing you say that the role, kind of how you've interpreted and how you've seen other kind of leaders in your company and in your universe take that mantle at this time, has definitely been to err towards a more realistic / optimistic perspective, and really own that energy and bring that energy to the conversations and the ethos of how decisions are made. Am I interpreting that correctly?
100%. Yeah, you have to have perspective, and fortunately, if you've gone through various challenging periods over the course of your life and career, you bring that perspective with you. And you know, there's a couple of elements here. Appreciate, and you got to deal in numbers and sometimes look at things in a somewhat cold way. Because that when you look at it cold or objectively, you get, I think, better perspective. And so from an economic standpoint, right, the impact is very short term. Overall, certain industries may take some time, but in aggregate, short term. Consumer is a huge part of the U.S. economy, a much greater percentage of the economy than any other country. And that consumer coming back is key. But again, that consumer has the wherewithal to come back very quickly from an economic standpoint. It's now a matter of their ability to. And in fact, and Eduardo will attest to this, the air cargo volumes have skyrocketed as people have shifted from buying in store to buying online. More so that, you know, that progression was happening over the past 20 plus years. That's accelerating as a result of this, right? So therefore there are some shifts that are happening, but the consumer is there and they want to spend, right? They just have to find the vehicle and the opportunity to do so. So I'm very optimistic that, again, most industries will come back to the extent they've been affected, will come back very quickly in the balance of 20 and 21. Some industries, like Eduardo mentioned, because of the concern element and the risk return element, may take longer until a vaccine is ready. But having said that, they're still going to come back. It's just a matter of when. Now, what'll be interesting is who comes back, because not every company has the same ethos in terms of how they manage through this. Some will be better and have a more of a leadership position. And you look fast forward in 23, 24 time horizon, within even the airline industry, there could be a shakeup. Some may come through it better than others based on the actions they take through this time. So again, and by the way, Natalia, obviously optimism is key. Eduardo wouldn't have started a business, right, if he wasn't optimistic in it being successful, right? By and large, successful people deal in reality, but have an optimistic nature. And I think that's a fair balance.
I echo that sentiment. I'm curious, kind of, if we switched to talking a little bit about your teams at large, so both kind of your management teams, but your staff more generally. Obviously, as a leader and as two leaders who've had their own set of experiences, and as you say, have weathered very different situations, you come with a different perspective and a different set of grounding and perhaps kind of a resilient toolkit. Not everybody has that experience, and not everybody has those benefits. So kind of how have you been thinking about kind of preparing, anticipating, setting up your staff for the resilience that they need at this time in terms of how they're showing up professionally and personally?
Well, from our side, our groups are pretty, diverse in the sense that we have a technology team, and then we have what we call customer support team. The way the business is and the software and the model is built is that it's basically, there should be little support, but there's always support. And we try to distinguish ourselves by having a team that steps in to help the payers, be it get their cargo release or a refund or something of that nature. And it's important to divide it out, because the technology team, they're basically in their 30s and 40s, and this is not by design, it's just the way it's ended up. But the customer service team, a lot of them FIU graduates, they're 22 to 28, I think is our oldest customer service representative. Some go on to do other things like sales and so forth, but how do you manage each one is a little bit different. I think that, and how you motivate them is a little bit different, but I think the challenge is, how long does this at home process continue. Because for the older groups working at homes, we find it to be not a major issue. The younger groups, I think they need a little bit more of the bonding and getting together and having the Friday lunch that we have as a group, and you know, those kind of things. It's part of building, I think, not only team but camaraderie and everything else. And it's more difficult to do that when you're, you know, we're doing it on what is it, through a Zoom call. Right. So I think that that's going to be, you know, that's really the challenge. How do you manage each specific group? I look at our you know, our business in Brazil. We, you know, we're one of 2 ports, nothing to do with PayCargo, but basically we have 400 people working at the port. The business has dropped 50%. You know, Latin America has taken a pretty bad financial beating. How they recover, I mean, let's look at, one of my Brazilian partners kindly brought to my attention, is in the US, you can borrow probably 20-year bonds at 0.5% of an interest rate and do those for 20 years and probably refinance your whole debt and almost for nothing. You know, Brazil doesn't have that opportunity. Right. So do the rich get richer and the poor get poorer as a result of this on a worldwide basis? And how do we extend, you know, ourselves to be able to help those that, to bounce back? Because it's important to the U.S. Trade is huge. And if our neighbors are healthy, we're healthy. So that global community is not going to change. Right.
I think, Natalia, communication to that younger generation is key. And across the board, the companies I'm involved with made it a point to communicate early and often. In most cases, there was communication at least once a week to the broad employee base. But in other cases, but independent of that, there was also communication within the organization, whether it was using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever, but there were team meetings, in many cases, team communications daily, where department heads would get with their people and have basically daily updates, and then augmented then by the overall corporate messaging that was done on a weekly basis. You know, that's key, because for those that have not gone through it, they don't have the same level of appreciation and perspective, and therefore they struggle with direction, and that communication serves to provide that direction and semblance of normalcy, which is important.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. I'll kind of I'll start wrapping up my questions, and then we can open up to the audience questions. But you know, small businesses comprise a super majority of U.S. employers, and obviously, and they have different challenges than larger or even like medium-sized established scaling entities. Do you have any advice for kind of the small business sector specifically?
In the case of Pool, while Pool itself is not a small business, we do sell to 120,000 customers, and those 120,000 customers are almost universally all small businesses. The dynamic there is as a company, we've always advocated promoting the growth of our customers' businesses as an integral to our success as a business. So therefore, we've endeavored to do a lot of things to help them and their businesses succeed. And again, Pool took a leadership position there in terms of working with customers in different markets and different customer segments to identify what they could do in those markets. A lot of it goes back to what we were talking at the outset of the call, which is understanding where's the opportunity, how do you pivot to address the situation. Fortunately, most of the sector in most geographies was open. By whether maintenance or repair or replacement, because you're dealing with water and the maintenance of that water. In some cases, construction in a few markets where it was halted, but where it was halted, we worked with those customers to pivot over and do more remodel and replacement work, because those opportunities were latent there, and take advantage of that situation in a positive way to keep their employees and keep on functioning. You know, overall, it's important to understand that yes, that small company is key because they are the largest new employer in society. So it's almost like you have a vested interest in their success in a very strong way.
Yeah.
Well, you know, from my side, we run a small business. If you think about it, although I find it more difficult to say it when this year we'll probably handle about $5 billion in payments. And so, but still, and our customer base is pretty diverse. We have the, you know, the DHL, the FedExes, Lufthansa, Delta Airlines, Air France, KLM, etc. So, but if we look at our network, and we have a network of over, I believe, over 25,000 payers, the great majority of those are smaller companies. It could be as small as a mom and pop freight forwarder to a small $10 million a year freight and logistics company with 10 employees. So our message really to them is we're here to help you. You know, if you run into trouble, let us know. You know, you have to pay your freight bills, how we can do that. It's, you know, we've extended more credit through our PayCargo finance capital division. We've increased our parameters, which is extending a little bit more of the risk from our side, just to keep these companies moving, because this is a short-term cash situation. It's not long-term. The business has not gone away. As Manny mentioned, the air freight is gonna grow, and it's continuing to probably rebound to the levels that it was a year ago, so that you know, these companies will still be there. But it's from our standpoint is how do we help those companies operate from home? And I think one of the stories we had is one of our customer service reps was asked how to help someone pay their, you know, electric bill online at their bank, you know. And so you have to go that step forward. It's not what we do, but yes, we can, you know, show you how to log on and so forth, and not just into our system. So those are the things that we're trying to do to help these small businesses, because they are the future. And you know, I've always, you know, I worked for two large companies. I worked for the largest company in the industry when I started my career, Sealand, and I left Sealand to go into business for myself. And since then, I've always been in what I could call a small business, because even though we've had over 400 employees in one business and 200 in another, and I've said to myself, I never want to get over 100 employees ever again in another business. But the fact is that, you know, it's a unique world when it is, as someone always told me, it's completely different when it is your money. So in this case, it's not just my money, it's the money of our investors and our partners. So, you know, you have to keep that always in mind, as well as you do when it's a public company, and you have to, you know, you're protecting your shareholders. But it does get a little more personal when it is your own money. So you always keep that in mind when it's a small company. You know, you think about it, you know, to start a restaurant, you often go through $1 million, $2 million worth of renovations. Your money, everything you've saved, you put your house on the line. You know, you borrow money from your friends and neighbors, and if it's a hit, you know, it's fantastic. But if it isn't, it's a life's effort gone into what is your dream, and it doesn't work out. You know, I've been very fortunate. I've been involved in, you know, businesses that have been at the right time, right place, right time. PayCargo is one of them. But, you know, and again, coming back to being flexible and always optimistic, but realistic. You know, the numbers are always the truth. So you know, as optimistic as you can be, you can't run away from the numbers. But I'm giving you a little bit more, but these are the kind of things that we try to work with, you know, the smaller companies, and, you know, remind them that, you know, they have to think not just of today, but of tomorrow, and is the business model they're in something that will work in the future? And for the most part, it really is. So they just have to find a way to be flexible, adapt, and keep their costs down until rebound comes. And as Manny said it, we've gone through a lot of these, 9/11, we went through, the financial crisis in 2008, when the world appeared to be collapsing. And look, here we are. This is kind of unique. I have to tell you, this is, I think the last generation to go through it was what, 1918? I'm not sure there's many of those around today to tell us about it, but it is what it is. All right.
By the way, Natalie, excuse me for 1 second. Just in the conversation, Eduardo, I worked with Sealand. I started with Sealand I worked from 77 to 82. So small world. We'll catch up afterwards.
We'll catch up on that, man.
Oh, what a fun surprise. I'll kind of switch us a little bit to, since I know we're wrapping up on time. One of the questions from the participants was imagining a future moment at which you're reviewing resumes, and obviously everybody's resume is now going to have some sort of 2020 moment or 2020 gap reflected in it, especially if we're thinking about kind of advice for graduating students. So the question was, what would you like to see in a person's resume around 2020, or what would you consider a negative? And so I'll kind of pivot that a little bit into what advice also do you have for graduating students from MBAs or college, et cetera, at this time?
Well, I'll try to answer both quickly. One is on the resume is for 2020, what did they do, right? Okay, as opposed to did they just sit, right? If they did something, that's a very positive sign. If they waited for something to happen, that's not a positive sign. The advice I give young people, I gave to my own kids and I give to others is first, if you're in your 20s, you should be doing something that you enjoy doing where you can learn a lot. Those are the two biggest considerations. That's the biggest opportunity to learn. And if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do well. So those are the two key factors. Over time, priorities may shift a little bit, but those are the two keys. And the financial side is secondary. In other words, if one has two job opportunities, it provides them a significant learning opportunity, a more significant learning opportunity, and it's something that they really are going to enjoy. And there's another one that pays, let's say, $10,000 more, but is not going to provide the same learning or the same enjoyment. Pick learning and enjoyment. At the end of the day, not only will you be happier, but you'll also be more successful.
Difficult to add to that. I think you hit all the points I would have hit, my friend. The only thing I would say is keep in mind while you're doing this, it's not you, it's the economy. So, but what you do with it is really, that's the only thing that's in your hands. So, maybe it's that, I don't want to say you were delivering newspapers because there's not many newspapers to deliver anymore, but you did something. And I think that's what we're going to look for.
All right. Another one of the participant questions was about strategic planning. So thinking ahead or expecting that there will be new ways of interacting with customers, employees, new regulations, new working environments. I mean, what is not potentially going to be changed? And so kind of are the expected changes to these aspects significant in terms of, redefining strategic plans and how people implement them? What advice do you have?
There are two parts. There are some trends that are already taking place, and this process only serves to accelerate those, whether it be remote working, the use of technology in your enterprise and how you conduct yourself. I think those things are, again, they were happening already, have been happening for many years. This just accelerates them. So therefore, as an enterprise, you gotta always be thinking from an investment standpoint, what's gonna be happening, not in the next 6 months, but 5, 10, 20 years out, and making investments towards that. And it goes back to some of the comments I was making earlier in terms of who's gonna be more successful 3 to 5 years from now. And that's based on the investments they make now. And both in terms of people, in terms of technology, in terms of business processes. So that's that aspect of it. I think the other side is in the more near-term aspects, there are some investments, or I can't say investments, but some capacity expansion that perhaps is going to be done different than it would have been done otherwise. So perhaps otherwise, you may have sought to bring in people and you needed more office space. Well, guess what? You may still be bringing in the people. You may not need to bring in the office space. So that's just one example. How you serve your customers, you know, the express lanes and the buy online, pick up in store. That aspect of it, again, that's been happening for well over 10, 12 years. That's accelerating in a big way. So you've got to pivot from an investment standpoint on that pickup activity and dedicate more space and resources to help facilitate that, to better serve the consumers, not only in 2020, but more so as that continues to grow and evolve in 21, 22, 23.
So I would follow up with that yes, whatever the trends were there and where they were heading, I think they're going to be accelerated. You look at it, I mean, we look at it in our industry, our main competitors is companies issuing checks. Well, checks are going to go away. Who wants to handle a check? So that's going to be moving to the point that you're going to see checks less and less in the B2C world as well as B2B world, especially in the B2B world where there still is pretty common. The other side of it is, you know, a number was given to me the other day. There's $18 trillion worth of purchases that are still done in cash. Who wants to be touching money? So there's already a push to go to, you know, credit cards or virtual credit cards or those kind of electronic payments, you know, and that's for the consumer side of life. I think you're going to see less cash, and that's going to be accelerated. The fact is, you know, there's certain customs, and I've always said, you know, we Cubans, we hug, we kiss. You know, it's as you go to Europe, they kiss twice in the cheek, and if you're in the Netherlands, it's 3 times. I don't see that going away. You know, once this thing is over, I think we'll all come back to the kind of warm people we were. So honestly, some things will change. Others, I think, are just going to be on hold, but they'll come back. What can I say? You know, you go to Japan, you bow. So I don't think they're going to start hugging anytime soon. So let's.
No, probably the opposite. I guess a final question in our last couple minutes, any related to your industry or not, anything kind of interesting? Obviously, this is an opportunity to innovate around the gaps that are created, or, you know, some of the examples that you've given also lead for, if somebody notices them and can pivot around these opportunities quickly, they're really incredible kind of market segments and or gaps that are identified. It's kind of innovations that you've seen or interesting pivots that you've seen in your industry, in your own company, or just in general that you've read about. Anything stand out as a really kind of interesting or curious example?
Well, if I may, just from the airline industry, it's incredible what they've done. You're seeing cargo being loaded on passenger seats. I mean, the airlines have gone out and without even taking the seats out, because the cargo has boomed in certain, you know, areas of the world. They've gone ahead and said, we're going to use what we have and let's put cargo onto those seats because we don't have passengers. I think that kind of innovation, and I think, you know, companies like the, you know, same in the airline side where they've said, we're going to go to a hub and then move everything by truck throughout the US, and we're just flying out of Atlanta. But we're going to have 5 flights out of Atlanta so that we're constantly working 24/7 to make this continued movement of cargo, be it medical goods or whatever's necessary, you know, continue to move. You see those kind of, you know, innovations. I think, what is the future? Half of the airplane could be cargo. There could be only row 1 through 20. And after 20, the back of the plane could be all cargo, because that's that could be where the future ends up, where it gets us to having more than one flight out of one city versus, you know, one of the concerns being that if you live in a small city, and obviously not, you know, not as bad as Jacksonville, but let's say if it's somewhere like Ocala, you only have one flight a day, you know, so, and if you miss that flight, you're driving. So the only way I think to avoid that is to have a different mix. And I think that's where, you know, I think that's where I see the future of it. You have to innovate. You have to innovate. And that's where we've seen innovation. From our side, it's really, you know, 24/7. We've shifted a significant time of our team over to the weekends because a lot of these flights are going out on weekends. And then you have, you know, the ships, the ship lines basically said this vessel that carries 20,000 containers, as far as we're concerned, only carries 15,000. So we're 15, we're full. So we can keep other ships moving. I mean, these are things that, you know, it affects the profitability, but allows the transit times to, obviously you're not impacting the transit times, but the frequency of the transits of the sailings to continue. And this is where I think that a lot of innovations, there's a lot of smart people out there in all of our industries. And I think that they're going to continue to innovate and find a way, you know, to make the changes that are necessary to be profitable and to survive. And again, as we look at this, you know, hopefully we're looking at a 6 to 9 months issue, you know.
Manny, any last words?
Well, one of the companies I'm involved with serve the restaurant sector. That's one of their customer segments, and obviously that's been hit hard. And frankly, they pivoted while they still serve that sector in a you know, reduced volumes that have been taking place. They pivoted, and some of the same products cross over. And the healthcare sector, certainly in terms of PPE products, really was in short supply. So they pivoted and have mitigated the adverse impact that would have naturally happened by virtue of that pivot and being able to not only maintain but further expand some of their sourcing capabilities to serve the healthcare sector and again mitigate the adverse impact of the business.
Yeah, interesting. Well, yeah. I think we're right on time. We're 1 minute over, which in my mind is very on time for Miami. So far so good. Thank you both, Manny and Eduardo, for joining and for a really kind of exciting and nuanced conversation at a time that can sometimes feel a bit unsettling for many people. So thank you for sharing your experiences, your perspectives, kind of your look ahead. Thank you to the folks who submitted some questions as well. I'm glad that we were able to get to a handful of them. And obviously, thank you to CasaCuba and FIU Business for putting this together and for launching this series of hopefully ongoing and very interesting conversations. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Natalia.
Of course, my pleasure. All right, well, have a good rest of your Wednesday, everybody.
Manny, we'll catch up as ex-Sealanders. Take care, my friend.
Yes,
the best.